Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today, I'm joined by Matthew Lowe, PhD, research scientist, working with Unlimited Sciences and other projects. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me again.
Absolutely. I'm excited because you're coming close to getting a piece published based on a lot of work you've done over, I assume, a couple years at least, with a project
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Central America. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so last time you had us on, we're in the stages of designing the project, thinking about the background and where we wanted to take the project. And we've since completed the project, ran it successfully. The study was conducted at CASA, formerly the Jungle Neighborhood in Costa Rica. And we just published the preprint recently, and the article is now under peer review for publication in a journal. So we're pretty excited about the results.
That's fantastic. I guess before we dig in, let's kind of qualify who you are a bit for the audience who
Yeah.
don't remember. So, can you give us a little bit of your kind of training and background and what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm the Chief Scientific Officer for Unlimited Sciences. To give a brief background there for Unlimited Sciences, so we were formed in 2018 as a nonprofit research organization with the aim to conduct observational or naturalistic research. So just to kind of go into a little bit about what that is. So most of the psychedelic use cases that we see in the real world are occurring outside of clinical settings, of course. So 99.99 times percent people are using psychedelics, it's outside of clinical trials or controlled environments. And yet we don't have a lot of data on real world evidence of psychedelic use. So it's really important that we capture observational research, that we capture data in the real world to understand how people are really using psychedelics. So that's what we do. Since 2018, we have been conducting research on observational psychedelic studies. So we have the largest psilocybin study in the world on naturalistic psilocybin use with over 8,000 individuals enrolled. That's a collaboration with Johns Hopkins University. And they've also run several investigations looking at smaller, lesser known communities. For example, we ran a study on ayahuasca use in Middle Eastern and North African immigrants and refugees. And then we also recently we're looking at the queer population and seeing if we could see or track health outcomes over time for a population of queer individuals who are undergoing ayahuasca. So that's what we've been up to recently. So my role is to conduct the research. My background, so my PhD is in cognitive neuroscience and psychology. I did my PhD at the University of Toronto and then my postdocs at MIT and Harvard before working at a lab at Stanford University as a research scientist in mental health. So I've been kind of moving around a little bit, but I really believe that psychedelics are the next frontier in how we treat mental health conditions. So I switched into that a few years ago and joined Unlimited Sciences. Oh, I think you're on mute. Sorry, Joe, I'm not hearing any audio right now.
Hoping we're back. Yeah, looks like we're
There
back.
we go. Yeah,
Cool.
I can hear
Yeah,
you.
geez. All right. Well, audio failure. Sorry, everybody. So I heard all that and had no idea you spent some time in Toronto and the American Northeast too. Um,
Yeah.
Boston's a nice cold city. I spent a lot of time
Yeah.
in. Yeah, Toronto is not much warmer either.
No,
So
I certainly had my fair share of East Coast winters for the duration of my life. I think I'm finished with that. Living in California now and very happy there.
right. Yeah. So that's cool that you got a chance to actually do a lot of this naturalistic research and actually look at what's happening in the wild. I was involved in some conversations recently in um, uh, California. We'll call it Berkeley, just to be generic for a minute. Like the idea of a lot of these projects was only looking at safety and clinical applications and effect in clinical
Yeah.
applications. And while that's interesting, it's like it's such a small slice of what's actually happening. And, if we're really out for safety and performance and whatever else is going on here, like we got to look at the real data sets. So thank you for looking at the real data sets.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Of course, we look at safety and adverse effects in all of our studies to assess different risk factors. But with this recent study on the LGBTQ plus population, we were really interested in broader aspects of what can affect mental health. So that's why we designed this study to look at things like self-compassion, shame, body esteem, and also queer-centered metrics, so internalized homophobia, sexual identity distress. We really wanted to examine how long-term changes could occur over time as a result of psychedelic use. And that's precisely what we saw.
Um, so let's dig into the results you got from the, recent queer study you're doing, Jungle Neighborhood. What was the new name of the facility?
CASA with a Q,
CASA.
QASA.
Cool. CASA. Cool. I like
Yeah.
that. So, can you tell us like a little bit about what you put out in the preprint?
Yeah, so the preprint was the first of three papers that we're currently writing up, where we're looking at different aspects of psychological and mental health. And to go a little bit into the background there, it's estimated now that nearly 1 in 10 U.S. adults are identifying as LGBTQ plus or not heterosexual, something other than heterosexual, and that's obviously a really big statistic. But what's really important in that is LGBTQ plus individuals are also more likely to face mental health conditions, disproportionate rates of suicidal ideation, and also less access or stigma around healthcare. So there's this population that's a little bit more vulnerable to mental health conditions, that also has less access to healthcare. And so it's a growing population in the US rapidly. So this population is really important to study and identify, how alternative therapies could help these individuals. So that was kind of the foundation for why we ran the study in the first place. And we wanted to look at different things. As you said, we didn't want to just look at risk profiles and safety. We didn't want to just look at depression, anxiety. We wanted to look at the broad spectrum of the experience of queer individuals. And so we put our participants through quite the gauntlet in this study, had them do many pre and post measures. And the study design was essentially, we had a bunch of individuals who were interested in taking ayahuasca for themselves as part of this queer retreat, utilizing ayahuasca. And so we were able to get both baseline recordings, so a number of surveys and measurements taken prior to them taking anything, any sort of substance. And then we tracked this over several months to see any changes in those health outcomes. So that was kind of broadly the study design that took place last year in Costa Rica. And so initially we looked at, the main kind of set of findings of these results, and we published a preprint on that. So we found significant increases to quality of life, significant increases to self-compassion, shame, spiritual well-being, decreases to shame. And so the main findings that we published from that paper were seeing reductions in mental health conditions such as depression and anxiety, seeing increases to spiritual well-being, and increases to quality of life. So essentially, we're seeing different aspects, different facets of mental health and psychological health being affected by ayahuasca. We also conducted interviews during this time, extensive interviews for each of the participants. That'll be our upcoming paper. So that'll look at narrative perspectives of these individuals. But the really interesting results are in the next quantitative paper that we're going to be publishing. So we found several different significant findings that arose over time. So the way we looked at it, we had the experience, and then 2 to 4 weeks later, we assessed again a number of mental health outcomes. And then 2 to 3 months after that, after the initial session, we assessed again. So that allows us to look at changes occurring in the weeks and months following ingestion of ayahuasca. And the results were pretty damn cool. So we found significant reductions in internalized homophobia that extended to the 2 to 3 month window. Similarly, we found reductions in sexual identity distress for these individuals. We also found, the mental health outcomes that you would expect replicated from previous designs. So depression, anxiety were reduced during this time. Some of the other cool findings that we found were an increase in hope and subjective happiness. So two mediating variables that may contribute to benefits to mental health. We also found reductions in shame. So shame has been focused on recently in the queer community as a significant mediator of individuals who experience less shame or who are able to resolve shame face better mental health outcomes. So we wanted to see if ayahuasca could change that, and it did. We saw reductions in feelings of shame from before to after the ayahuasca experience, which were pretty powerful, and also corresponded with the qualitative or narrative data that we're getting from people at the time. So overall, the study was pretty successful in showing that there are a number of benefits. When we looked at the risk profiles for these individuals, we saw incredibly low rates of adverse effects. We did see that approximately about half of the individuals characterized the experience as one of the most challenging experiences of their life. But they also characterized it, the majority of them, as one of the most personally meaningful and spiritually insightful experiences of their life. So there is this kind of double-edged sword. These experiences can be challenging, they can be difficult, but ultimately they usually result in very powerful and profound experiences.
Yeah. Great. And that tracks with my lived experience too. It's like so much less shame, so much like that it was a really horrifying, amazing experience that I'm happy I did. And like it's good to see that in a fairly sizable data set. That's
Yeah.
cool. And do you think this could inform where people research from here in similar kind of queer populations or other populations?
I think so. There's been a significant focus in research in general for psychedelics on looking at these main indicators of mental health, like PTSD, anxiety, depression, and those. It's important to focus on those areas of research and to show that psychedelics can benefit specific mental health conditions. But what we were trying to do in this research is look at lesser known health outcomes, things like shame, self-compassion, subjective happiness, hope. We also looked at things like connectedness and loneliness and found significant reductions in feelings of loneliness, increases in feelings of connectedness. So all of these aspects as part of the kind of social and psychological aspects of being human are very important for our mental health. So I'm hoping that our research, once we publish this research, will impact the way we think about psychedelics, is not just directly influencing certain mental health outcomes like depression, anxiety, but also influencing general well-being, our ability to think about ourselves from a different perspective, to have reductions in shame, to have increases in self-acceptance, to feel more connected with the world and feel like you're less alone. All of these things are significant indicators and mediating variables for various mental health conditions. So that's what I'm hoping we begin to explore in psychedelics in the coming years, are these other aspects of general well-being and health that aren't just clinical symptoms of a specific condition.
That's really interesting. Like how do you think folks took it being involved in a research study? Were they excited? Was it like kind of a burden? What did you see there?
There was a lot of excitement for sure. So I joined the study to make observations and conduct the qualitative interviews last year. And there was definitely a really beautiful energy that arose from the experience. It's very rare to have a container, a psychedelic container, where you feel very connected and aligned with the other people in the container, especially if you're part of a minority group like the queer population. So we had many people talk about the idea of a safe container, the the way that they could be vulnerable to these experiences and allow them to be open to the psychedelic experience because they were around other individuals that they felt were like them. And so that just speaks to the power of a psychedelic container and how important that atmosphere is for group psychedelic treatments. So there was a lot of excitement. There was a lot of camaraderie, especially from the beginning to the end of the experiment. We saw a lot more group cohesion, a lot more willingness to be vulnerable and open. The stories that people were sharing grew over the weeks. We saw a lot of friendships develop amongst the participants. As a queer man myself, it was really beautiful to witness this in real time, to witness healing happening in real time over the course of a week. And the group really compounded those results through group therapy, through personal insights, through support from one another during that time. So yeah, it was by the time we did the interviews at the end of the week following the experience, we just heard some really beautiful stories of vulnerability and openness and connectedness that I think were quite powerful.
I love that. Um, Being able to do, like, for whatever reason, I didn't catch that you got to do these interviews in person. Um, that's going
Yeah.
to be like a different energy, right? Like, I, for whatever, assume everything's over Zoom or whatever we're doing here, because that's what I do. But like, there's in your training, is there kind of like qualities that you can pick up on in doing in-person interviews that maybe are a little harder with digital methods?
Yeah, I mean, so in-person interviews, in my experience, tend to be a lot more open, vulnerable, and more involved in conversation and dialogue. So, I mean, as a researcher, you can't really say anything besides the designated questions that you're assigned to. So, it wasn't like I was having conversations with these individuals. I was simply following the questions. But I have noticed that in person versus Zoom, people tend to be a bit more vulnerable. They can read your body language, they're more comfortable. And so we did have that experience. So I think it was really important that I was there in person to conduct the interviews. And the stories were honestly very moving. I mean, they range from, experiences of trauma to experiences of love and everything in between, overcoming challenges, self reflection on being queer and what that means to these individuals. And I will say, like, it was really beautiful hearing those stories, and I felt quite moved myself, also as a queer man, relating to a lot of the stories that were shared with me. So it was pretty touching. I won't lie, I probably shed a tear or two during some of the exchanges that I had, just because some of the stories are just so profound, as we hear with many psychedelic experiences.
Yeah. So, um, I guess back to the actual ayahuasca administration, was it kind of in like a Shipibo context, or what kind of facilitation was happening?
Yeah, so it was conducted by the Bird Tribe, Tony Moss and the Bird Tribe.
Mm,
And it was a mix of contemporary and traditional practices, mainly focused around music. So there were four musicians playing different instruments and singing as well. So it was a really beautiful ceremony in that regard, taking the participants on a journey of ranges in different vocal productions and live instrumentals. And it was interesting seeing that context, the mixture between contemporary modern practices as well as honoring more traditional and indigenous traditions. And I think they did an incredible job with that. Um, and it really was evident in how people responded to the ceremony, which was very positive. And we actually ran, as part of the experience, we ran a facilitated trust scale, which
mm.
captures how trustful individuals are experiencing the facilitated to be. And we found across the board just very high levels of facilitated trust in this group. So, and multiple reports that the facilitator himself, and with there were four of them, became a significant part of the experience. So much like in more indigenous practices.
That's brilliant. Yeah, and I've heard only positive things about the Tony Moss community, so that's helpful. Bird Tribe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great music too. If people need that kind of music, check it out. Um,
Yeah.
and that's interesting. It's kind of like an LA based community from what I understand. So it's kind of like nice that you had that locally to you probably were able to connect with them a little bit for research purposes too. Is my
Yeah, I
guess.
believe Tony lives in Silver Lake, I think. So it was cool to connect.
Yeah. So, is there anything you wish you captured retrospectively that you weren't able to capture as you were executing?
I mean, honestly, there's always a million things that I wish I captured. As a research scientist, you have this conundrum of having to design a study and have certain things in the study, but also limitations of time. You can't, have someone sit down and do 6 hours worth of questionnaires. It'll break your brain. So you're always confined by the limitations of, what people are willing to answer and put up with. So there was a long design process where we considered everything we wanted to look at, and of course, a number of different things didn't make the cut. So I think there's always room for follow ups. Particularly from this data set, we did explore shame as a concept, but I'm really interested in further identifying patterns of guilt and shame that could be um, resolved or benefit from a psychedelic experience. And there's been research since on this idea of shame in the psychedelic experience and how it reduces shame. And there's been a few papers out right now, including one from our psilocybin registry, which had over 8,000 individuals enrolled. So we did publish a study there on shame. And I think when shame comes up, it's just this really important factor in not only how we see ourselves, but how we move along our psychedelic and mental health journeys. Because those reductions in shame allow you to change perspective, to shift out of a rigid thought pattern, to allow yourself to give yourself grace to heal, to give yourself grace to make mistakes and forgive the past and let go of trauma. So that's one aspect that I'd really love to see further explored. One that I didn't include in this current study beyond body esteem and self-esteem. I'd love to look at gender dysphoria as well as body dysphoria or dysmorphia and how the psychedelic experience can change that. Because in the queer community, we see a lot of gender and body dysmorphia, and I think psychedelics could be powerful tools of self-acceptance and reflection that may benefit that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like these general kind of, um, yeah, how how do we actually get measures around people kind of facing squarely these things that are, yeah, deeply embedded into the way we're experiencing the world and our day to day, like yeah, even body dysphoria, gender dysphoria, like these are major things for folks. And
Yeah,
I would actually love to see something. So, like, generally, we say things like eating disorders are the hardest things to like treat, and I think there's components of body dysphoria there, or like
for
I don't know,
sure.
body image dysphoria or something. So, like, I wonder if there's a bridge there between those two topics, and even gender dysphoria, for
Absolutely. I
instance.
mean, they're definitely related topics. I think individuals who individuals who experience body dysmorphia are more likely to have eating disorders. They're definitely connected topics. I'm not too familiar on the research right now on eating disorders and psychedelics, but I would imagine that psychedelics could benefit eating disorders because they certainly benefit addiction type disorders. So anything that gets you out of that rigid thought pattern, the rigid ways of thinking, makes your brain more neuroplastic, increases your cognitive flexibility, allows you to see things differently. I figure it'll help any condition around that.
Yeah, I think it was a Hopkins paper, but people can check that out on their own. So, is there any like data that we have on gender dysphoria that we might be able to like infer kind of help from psychedelics like ayahuasca helping those conditions?
So the interesting thing about psychedelics in the queer community is that there's actually incredibly little amount of research. So if we go back, just to like give a quick recap in that, so in 1952, the APA pathologize homosexuality. So it was in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health. It was considered a pathology. And it wasn't until the early 1970s that they depathologized it. So during that time, that was the time when psychedelic research was really on the rise in the 50s and 60s. By the 1960s, we had over 40,000 patients being treated using LSD and over 1,000 published papers talking about various mental health conditions. So unfortunately, coinciding with the time that homosexuality was pathologized was this rise in psychedelic research. So there's actually a fair bit of research on conversion therapy and using psychedelics for conversion therapy. So in that case, psychedelics were sort of weaponized as a tool against the LGBTQ plus community. And so there's a little bit of, background that we need to fix there. But because of the way that the Controlled Substances Act happened and how psilocybin and LSD were rescheduled and the lack of research, we've actually gone decades without seeing any real quantitative research on intersections of psychedelics and the queer community. And that's changing in recent years. We're seeing now some research being conducted in a few labs that are looking at queer identity and how that could be affected by psychedelics. But to this date, there's still very little published on it. So I think there's room for a lot of research examining this particular community, and especially around gender dysphoria. I think it could be very powerful in that context for self-acceptance. So I would love to see that research. I'm sure there are some labs even currently looking at that. But there's not a lot published right now.
Mm. Yeah, that's fascinating. And in this particular project, is Unlimited Sciences leading this particular paper? Was there like a partnership with a university at all, or are you kind of all
No,
alone?
it's just us. So we decided to do this one completely independently. So yeah, it was usually in the past we've worked with other institutions like Johns Hopkins University or Imperial College of London, UC Santa Cruz or San Francisco. But with this one, we just had the opportunity to run it independently. So that's what we did. So yeah, it was kind of a full scale operation just in-house.
Well, that's fascinating. Was that and I imagine like now that you're at this point, you're getting excited and you're kind of saying, okay, like now what? And you learned a lot from this past study. So like, are you kind of getting ideas on what you want to do next, or are you already kind of deep into it?
Yeah, I mean, we still have a couple papers we need to write up and finish analyzing the data for.
Hmm.
We did partner with Phil Hammock, who's a researcher at UC Santa Cruz, I believe, and he's helping us with the qualitative analysis of our data. So it was nice to have that partnership. His qualitative research skills are much more advanced than ours in limited sciences. So, to build on that, I'm really excited about that paper. The interviews that I conducted were just so beautiful and moving, and also informative in so many ways. So I'm really looking forward for that research to come out and publish that. So that's a kind of big step. We also, interestingly, we filmed a documentary during that time during the experience. So we got consent from the individuals participating in the study last year, and we filmed the events leading up to the experience and then after. So of course we didn't film the experience itself because that would be a difficult thing to do when you're having a vulnerable experience. But we got a lot of the perspectives from before to after the experience, and that's now been part of a documentary with CASA that is just a really beautiful short film on the experiences of these individuals. So I'm looking forward to that coming out in a more public way. We've shown snippets of that and shown it at different local kind of productions, but it would be nice to have that public. And then, yeah, we just kind of we're looking forward to what the next steps in research are. mission in the past has been to focus on naturalistic research, but also on vulnerable populations or marginal communities. And so we're still focused on that to get those voices heard from communities that haven't really been represented well in psychedelics before. We're currently writing up another paper on our Middle Eastern and North African immigrants and refugees data. So that's also narrative experiences, qualitative experiences. So I'm excited about that. So yeah, we have quite a lot in the works right now. Then some more papers with our psilocybin data, but that's always kind of happening because we have just a lot of data there.
Yeah. Um, can you tell us a little bit about the Middle Eastern study? Like a little bit
Yeah,
more about what
so
was going on there?
so that one was specifically looking at the MENA population, Middle Eastern and North African individuals. So that population is so immigrants and refugees face significant challenges to mental health and access to mental health care. So typically, these are populations that tend to be vulnerable to certain mental health conditions, especially trauma-induced ones related to the immigration process. And this process can be a difficult one. You uproot your life and you move it from one country to the next. You lose your support systems, your structure, you lose routines and habits, and all of these can make it very difficult when you're immigrating. And when you combine that with individuals who are from war-torn countries or are in difficult situations politically or socially, that can compound these issues. So that study started when we had an individual, Malik Asfir, who approached us, and he said he wanted to bring this to the public eye that psychedelics could be beneficial for individuals who are suffering from processes related to the immigration or refugee process. And so he asked us to study a group of individuals that were undergoing ayahuasca therapy for this purpose. So it was a group of mostly female immigrants and refugees. And we tracked their progress similarly to the queer study over a number of months, looking at before to after health outcomes. And in the same way that we did a safe container of queer individuals in the last study, we also did a safe container of MENA individuals in this study that we published a couple of years ago. And the results were pretty powerful. Firstly, we saw high rates of trauma, high rates of anxiety and depression at baseline in these individuals. It was clear that these individuals had faced challenges and difficulties. And then through the process of attending this ceremony with like-minded individuals or individuals where they could feel safe, we saw significant benefits to mental health following that. So you saw changes to reductions in depression, anxiety, reductions in experiences of PTSD symptoms. And then we also saw similar things to what we saw in the queer study, reductions in feelings of shame, increases in self-compassion. So we published that, I believe we published that last year, looking at the long-term health outcomes for this population. And during that time, we conducted interviews assessing the narrative experiences or first-hand experiences of how these individuals went through this psychedelic experience. And that's what we're publishing in Nest that we're currently writing up. So that covers themes. So we do what's called a thematic content analysis, where we look at themes that emerge during the interview process. And some of the themes there include trauma, include the resolution of trauma. It also includes female-centered voices. So in some Middle Eastern countries, there can be sort of a patriarchal system that suppresses female-led voices. And we saw that arose in our study data. So yeah, I'm excited for that to come out too. We presented it earlier at MAPS at the conference in Denver, both of these results.
Mm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I wonder about like cultural baggage going into these kinds of treatments. Like, did you see anything like that?
Absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of cultural differences, especially when it comes to stigma around psychedelics. I think, in some ways, Western cultures can be more are more open to using psychedelics, and there can be more stigma in other cultures. So we're seeing, a sort of resistance to the use of psychedelics. But we're also seeing that these substances can have immense benefits to these individuals, especially in ways that where healthcare has failed in other ways. For example, treatment-resistant depression. So by the time individuals are diagnosed with treatment-resistant depression, that means that they've gone through a number of different traditional medications like SSRIs or antidepressants that have failed. And psychedelics have been shown to significantly benefit treatment-resistant depression. So when you're getting this population that has experienced a lot of trauma, they're at far higher likelihoods to experience things like anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. So that's where psychedelics actually may be the most beneficial. But of course, this is still emerging research. We're still learning about the risks and the adverse reactions to these conditions, and it's not to be taken lightly, psychedelic use. So I think this research is really important to help us understand where psychedelics could benefit certain individuals and where traditional approaches to healthcare might align more.
Yeah. So, right, we're at a really interesting kind of cultural moment, and like these populations, particularly queer Middle Eastern folks in America, are being, harmed, should we say, or and like kind of like
Totally.
rights issues. So there's like additional kind of risk factors that are growing, that have always been there,
Yeah,
but it seems like they're increasing right now. So it seems more and more
I know
like
that's
this is
been kind
urgent.
of a scary thing as part of the LGBT community. It does feel like we're almost at an inflection point, uh, socially and culturally, politically, where our rights are being questioned again, and that's sort of a scary thing for people. I mean, many people will say that you know being gay now is easier than it was 50 years ago, of course, but it seems like we're seeing a trajectory now where our rights are being questioned, where there is stigma arising, where also stigma is being more publicly made present, if that makes sense. Just people more openly talking about hate, um, and so it's a scary time, and I think that contributes to a lot of uncertainty and can negatively impact a lot of mental health conditions like anxiety and depression. So, yeah, I think psychedelic research or research into alternative therapies that can help individuals in this way are particularly important right now.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, do you think like by being able to execute on research, you're providing hope to these people?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that, the more evidence that we provide, and the greater audience that we engage, we're providing opportunities and options. We're showing that there are alternatives, that there is hope for individuals to kind of resolve a lot of the trauma and difficulties and challenges that they're facing internally. They may not be able to control the external factors that we're seeing sociopolitically, but they can control their inner mental health, or can focus on healthy ways of healing. And so that was actually why in our last study we looked at ideas of hope. I was very curious if the psychedelic experience could change hope. So we ran the adult hope scale, to see from before to after if hope was being affected, and it was pretty cool. We found that it was over time. So from before to after the psychedelic experience of taking ayahuasca, people became naturally more hopeful. So
Hmm.
psychedelics help them be more optimistic about thinking about the future, to be more hopeful about thinking about the future. And that was a beautiful thing to see, especially in times where the future can sometimes feel a little bleak right now.
Right. Yeah. Um, it's a strange pivot, but I'm gonna try this anyway. So,
Yeah.
um, we have a lot of different ways of kind of slicing and dicing the world in ways in which we investigate the world. And I'm kind of thinking about these psychological measures and like how, obviously this is one way to try to get something close to objective, right? But
Yeah.
how do you try to like, get your kind of storytelling from what you've captured with these measures to like be helpful? Hopefully that's not too abstract of a question, but does that make sense at
No,
all?
I kind of get what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the more obvious ones are when we look at direct scales like symptoms of depression and anxiety, then we know that that can have, a direct correlation there. Like when we're seeing reductions in symptoms of depression and anxiety, that's an easy one. The more abstract ones are ideas like hope, subjective happiness, loneliness, like how are those really affecting individuals, especially long term outside of psychedelic use. Um, and that one's a little bit more difficult to understand. I think, as I said earlier, we're still kind of in this place of really understanding how psychedelics even impact the human body and the mind. I mean, just recently, I'm sure you've seen in the news a lot of reports of psychedelics are now being seen to as a longevity agent for aging. And so that's another interesting factor. It seems that every week now we're hearing about a new thing that psychedelics are doing. And when you think about psychedelics and what they're actually doing to the human brain, and basically the serotonergic system. So, classic psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin act on the 5-HT2A receptor. And that receptor is abundant across all spheres of mammalian biology. We're talking about cognition, mood, even circadian rhythms, sleep, appetite, sexuality. So serotonin is affecting all of this. So it also makes sense then that it's affecting other aspects of the brain. It's also it's causing or leading to what's known as neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. So everyone's heard the term neuroplasticity. That's the formation of new neurons across existing neuronal structures. So learning. But neurogenesis is the formation of new neurons. And so it's promoting new neurons to both grow and become more plastic across the brain. And so that makes sense that we would see it impacting aging research, that we may see benefits for research in dementias such as Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury, really anywhere where the brain is being impacted. So to kind of go back to your question, not too abstract, but it's sort of difficult to really focus on what psychedelics are doing to the human body because they seem to be doing an awful lot across all different aspects of mental health, of
Hmm.
well-being, of even now physical biology and aging. So I think we're in for a pretty wild ride over the next few years in uncovering just how deep the psychedelic rabbit hole goes and really how much it's affecting human biology.
Yeah. I recently uh got excited about a lot of this traumatic brain injury healing potential with psychedelics,
Yeah.
including ibogaine, and seeing professional sports pick it up in some cases, which is fascinating. I, had a big one a few years ago, so I'm still kind of curious about how I can leverage that for my continued wellness. And
I mean, it's a super interesting question. If we're seeing result, I mean, we know that classic psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin lead to neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. They also, in a recent paper in 2023, published in Nature, found that psychedelics reopen the critical window. So the critical window is this window of enhanced learning and neuroplasticity that allows us to become more cognitive flexibility, more adaptability, learn new things more easily, break out of rigid thought patterns. And for a long time, we didn't think that we could reopen this critical window easily without things like severe sensory deprivation. But psychedelics are kind of the master key. They allow us to rapidly open this critical window and learn new things, to shift out of rigid thought patterns. So I think we're seeing just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what psychedelics are really capable of. And through that, we're going to learn how we can really utilize them in the best way. For example, ibogaine is very well utilized right now for addiction treatment. Ibogaine, because of the long subjective experience, which is like 36 to 48 hours, has a very long critical window. So it's been shown to open your critical window for a minimum of 4 weeks. So during that time, your brain is highly plastic. You're able to change your thoughts and patterns. Psilocybin has a critical window of about 2 weeks after ingestion. And so this knowledge of how psychedelics are interacting with human biology will help us create treatment programs that allow us to utilize those benefits to the mind and body.
So there's, research you can do, and then there's research, people with different sets of training and resources could do.
Yeah.
Are there any kind of research projects you would hope other groups would execute on in the next couple of years that are, it's kind of like outside your scope in terms of research?
I would love to see more research in the neuroscience of psychedelics, specifically applied to um, human behavioral research. So a lot of the research that we're seeing right now is based on cultures or rodent studies, and that can only take you so far. It's incredibly useful, but a lot of the reports in the media that we're seeing on these benefits of psychedelics are coming from rodent studies or lab cultures. And I would love to see more research funding by the government into understanding the biological components of human psychedelic research. So that's something that's out of my wheelhouse personally. My background in cognitive neuroscience is more higher order function, perception, things like that. But yeah, I'd love to see the hard neurosciences of psychedelics and a lot more research there. I think would be pretty powerful because that would help us understand, you know, what exactly is it about aging that is being impacted by psychedelics? How can traumatic brain injuries benefit from psychedelic experiences?
Hmm.
I'm also super interested in whether psychedelics whether there's more evidence that psychedelics can be beneficial for certain dementias. So as we all know, like broadly across the world, maybe not in the US where our population rates are kind of declining, but broadly across the US, people are living across the world, people are living longer. They're living longer lives. And what happens in that case is you're more likely to experience a cognitive disorder, cognitive impairment, dementia, Alzheimer's. So I'm really curious if psychedelics are beneficial for aging, and they've been shown to slow down certain cells with aging. How beneficial are they for individuals who are experiencing dementia, experiencing cognitive decline, as a result of aging? So I think the most interesting sphere of research to me right now is aging and psychedelic research, whether it's related to just longevity or whether it's related to neuroplasticity and healing existing conditions like dementia.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I think I was chatting with an oncologist the other day. I was at the recent Santa Fe conference this past weekend, and he was talking about how in aging populations they're now seeing things that have never shown up before because you
Yeah,
used to
people
not
haven't lived long
survive that
enough.
chemotherapy, and
Yeah,
especially at 90 plus, and then all of a sudden you have this like interesting new fallout from the increase in survivability, and
yeah,
fallout isn't the right term, right? But like novel things happening, and then yeah, these neurodegenerative conditions, we're going to see all sorts of like I think sub aspects of like
totally.
how these things are playing out. And yeah,
Yeah, people are just they're living longer, and we're gonna see, I think, a lot of focus on that in the coming years. And how do we provide quality of life for these aging populations? How do we maximize those individuals? So I think, yeah, that's going to be a big one.
um yeah, the three people I know to watch in this kind of neuroscience lens are folks like Gould Lynn, Nolan Williams, and
Yeah, of course.
Carhart Harris, right? And like I hope that there's a bunch of new kind of superstars in the neuroscience lane coming up because that's only what three different universities, so there has to be more, and hopefully there's more
Yeah,
coming.
yeah, I love yeah, Goldillen's work was the one I was talking about, the publication on critical windows in Nature in 2023. So it's just really fascinating and groundbreaking research that I think could have the most enormous repercussions on our understanding and of aging, and how we can um, just keep quality of life around for as long as possible.
Yeah, her appreciated how you phrased that. Iboga having a minimum, or Ibogaine having a minimum of 4 week activity. Like the trial actually kind of ran out of money, right? And like
Exactly. Yeah.
we're
We don't
over.
know how long the critical window is open. It's just 4 weeks minimum.
Right. So I hope somebody picks that up and, starts
Same.
applying some funds to figure that out on account of how popular Ibogaine is becoming. So it's,
Yeah.
a real necessity. Are you
Agreed.
particularly excited about the Ibogaine research in the same way a lot of others are?
I think it's really fascinating for addiction. A lot of the research I'm seeing on that. I'm interested in other applications of ibogaine too, because I'm sure there are many. Ibogaine to me is a lesser known substance, so I don't know too much about that. But I have to say, just from a personal perspective, I hear the most incredible stories of individuals who are undergoing ibogaine treatment, and that ranges from very positive stories all the way through to this was the worst experience of my life and I never want to do it again. It's more the latter that I hear. But regardless of what the experience was, the impacts are profound. Whether it was a negative or positive experience, the impacts are there and are very profound. So it's clearly a very powerful substance. I'd love to hear more about your experience with it.
Um, I'm not hearing all that many challenging experiences in the way that you just described.
Interesting.
I'm hearing a lot of like it was a meh or it was out all the way extraordinary. I'm
Oh
not
wow.
hearing like the elevated tryptamine nightmares like that you could have from too many mushrooms or too much LSD. Like I've seen those in a lot of people. I've had one or two myself. Um but it seems like it's such a different pathway that it's
Yeah.
engaging the psychedelic activity that it's a different thing. Um I had a veteran friend the other day who hasn't touched it. He said, "Oh, that's the one where you see demons the whole time, right?" I was like, "Wow, that's a first. I've not heard that about ibogaine. That's fascinating." Um, and I'm similarly hearing really great results from a lot of aspects, including um,
Yeah.
addiction. But I'm also really interested in it for trauma healing. Um, but let's make sure people understand that there is kind of a cardiac issue here with
Yes.
this
Yeah.
drug, and we need to be really careful around it. I was able to, I was getting my heart checked out recently for something different, and I was able to ask my cardiologist, like, "Hey, I might be doing this experimental drug. Like, what do
Hmm.
you think?" No, you're good in that kind of like QT elongation conversation. So that's one data point, and I don't really trust that fully for
I
the
mean, I'm
same
glad you
thing.
brought that up because that's,
Hmm.
yeah, that's always been my biggest concern about the, you know, the mainstream acceptance of ibogaine is the issues around cardiac health. I mean, there are documented cases of sudden cardiac death in individuals who had pre-existing heart problems. And the problem with that is, most individuals don't know that they have a pre-existing heart problem until it becomes a problem, because we don't often know our heart health until it says something. So yeah, I think there should be a lot of focus around very careful administration and medical supervision of ibogaine. Um, and then I'm also in those settings where it is conducted in a very safe and ethical way. I think it's sort of been boxed into addiction therapy because it has been so incredibly powerful for addiction therapy. And it's not to say anything negative about that aspect, but I believe that ibogaine would have, because it's a psychedelic, and I think it would have significant impacts than you said in other spheres like depression, anxiety, trauma. So I think we're also just hearing a lot about addiction with ibogaine because that's what people are conducting research on, but I'm sure it would be beneficial in many other aspects.
Right. I can't wait to see the data, and we have to get
Yeah,
there. It's not
yeah,
just an addiction thing, and I think a lot of the way it's being pitched in the Texas, Arizona, I've heard Mississippi, this might be throwing in some money to this kind of research pool too, which is neat. Um, I'm hearing that they're including PTSD in the conversations, which is lovely.
oh, cool.
Excited to
That's
see
great.
what that efficacy is, and like how are we going to balance the costs of this kind of treatment versus an MDMA. What's the durability of the treatments? Um,
Yeah.
you know, MDMA is a pretty friendly drug, generally speaking, but the cost of the MAPS protocol could be a little higher than a single uh, ibogaine kind of protocol, but the
Yeah.
cost of the ibogaine stuff is so expensive on account of the medical supervision required. Um,
Yeah.
and who's to say, like, I would love to see really robust kind of psychological care containers similar to what we see with the MAPS protocols or Lycos protocols now,
Yeah.
and how that could boost efficacy. I haven't necessarily seen it yet that way in such a robust way.
Isn't that sort of the dilemma in psychedelic research more broadly is yet like everyone, there's so much promise right now, but just simply not enough research. We're still waiting on so much more evidence on risks and safety and adverse events and understanding how we can really take this further, but safely. So I just think there's so much research that needs to be done. And I'm really looking forward to more governmental funding, so more grant programs that encourage this kind of research, because that's really the only way that we're going to see safety data and applications of these different substances.
There was a film I watched um, at a conference that was at Aspen last year, the kind of Aspen Psychedelic Symposium, and they screened a
Mhm.
film that featured Norma Lotov's, Howard Lotov's wife and kind of partner in the Ibogaine project for Iboga
Oh,
project for
cool.
many years, and then Nolan Williams was featured heavily in there as well, and he was saying some really kind of wild stuff about how like this molecule ibogaine is just so different from what we're used to dealing with in terms of drugs that it's going to open up a whole new frontier of like I think he was saying neuropsychopharmacology is just like this
Wow.
big, um, yeah. And if you've heard Hamilton Morris talk about the molecule, it's such a different and alien molecule that like we're just not used to playing with. So it's
Hmm.
not a tryptamine, it's
Interesting.
not a phenethylamine, it's a very different animal. So we're gonna learn a
Yeah.
lot, and like here's to hoping we can solve a lot of problems with these new, applications of these things.
Agreed. And I think we will. It may take a number of years to get there with the appropriate protocols and safety and research on it, but we're certainly headed in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool, Matt. So, what did we maybe miss that would be fun to include as we're working towards wrapping up here?
The only thing I can think of, so in addition to the research that we run in the Limited Sciences, we do operate a fully free psychedelic info line. So anyone can call that line. They can just go to our website, unlimitedsciences.org. And we have a number of time slots you can book in, and you can request to speak with one of our team, and we can provide answers on any question that you may have around psychedelics. So if you're curious, or if you have information about medication interactions, or even if you just want someone to talk to about your psychedelic experience, so we offer evidence-based information to any question that you may have. So I just wanted to give a little shout out there for that. And yeah, otherwise, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. If anyone wants to be involved with us, we accept volunteers, we conduct research. And so if you're interested in working with us, just give us a shout.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I really appreciate all the hard work you've done and Unlimited Science has done. And I think
Thank
there's,
you.
yeah, you're welcome. It's just so good to see different kind of work getting done in the space as opposed to like the
Yeah,
standard kind of uh I appreciate people working in universities doing this stuff, but there's like a certain kind of incentives and pressures they have to deal with, and like
for
having this
sure.
happen in
Yeah.
a different container is really something I appreciate. So thanks for keeping that going.
Thank you. Yeah, we really pride ourselves on that, and the real world aspect and giving voices to communities that aren't necessarily represented in a lot of academic research. So it's been a good journey for us.
Right on. All right. Well, Matthew Lowe, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's hang out
Thank
backstage
you.
for a minute to make sure the recording's good, and hope we can do it again in the future.
Cool. Thanks, Joe.